The studio was full of energy. Bright lights shone on a cool modern stage. Big LED screens glowed in blue and gold, making the set look fancy and important. The audience whispered, excited for the show to begin. The show was called Voices in Debate, a famous talk show known for its deep conversations. The host, Alexander Hayes, was both admired and feared because he always asked tough questions that made his guests uncomfortable. In the middle of the stage, Alexander adjusted his tie and smiled slightly. He was tall, had neatly styled silver hair and sharp eyes. He was very good at making people reveal things they might not want to say. The show's theme music played, and the audience clapped loudly. The camera zoomed in on Alexander as he spread his arms wide, like a magician about to start a trick. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Voices in Debate," he said with confidence. "This is the show where we search for truth, question stories, and test great minds." The audience cheered. Every week, the show invited important people, politicians, smart thinkers, and famous celebrities, and asked them hard questions. But tonight's guest was extra special. He wasn't a politician or someone caught in a scandal. He was a legend, loved and respected, yet still a mystery. Alexander let the moment hang in the air before finally saying, "Tonight's guest is one of the most famous actors in the world. People admire him for being kind and humble, but he doesn't share much about his personal life. Tonight we're going to change that." He paused for dramatic effect. "Ladies and gentlemen, Keanu Reeves." The audience went wild. Some people even stood up, cheering loudly. The camera turned to the side of the stage, where a dark curtain slowly opened. Keanu walked out calmly with his usual quiet confidence. He wore a black suit without a tie. His shoulder-length hair fell neatly around his face, and a silver cross necklace glimmered under the bright lights. He gave a small, polite smile to the crowd before sitting across from Alexander. He sat in a relaxed way, not looking nervous at all. Alexander leaned forward, his sharp eyes locked onto Keanu. "It's a pleasure to have you here." Keanu smiled slightly. "The pleasure is mine, Alexander," he said in a calm voice. Alexander watched him for a moment, like a chess player planning his first move. "You have a reputation for being one of the kindest people in Hollywood," Alexander said. "Always nice, always private, never caught in a scandal. But honestly, Keanu, I think there's more to you than people realize." Keanu smiled knowingly and tilted his head. "I think we all have more layers than we show the world." Alexander nodded slightly as if he had just confirmed something. "That's exactly what we're here to explore." For a moment there was silence. Then Alexander's eyes flicked to the silver cross on Keanu's chest. He pointed to it and asked, "You don't talk much about religion or faith, but here you are, wearing a very clear Christian symbol." Keanu stayed calm. His fingers lightly touched the cross, a small habit. The studio lights flickered as the show returned from a commercial break. The audience whispered, excited to see what would happen next. Behind the stage, the Voices in Debate logo glowed. Alexander Hayes sat in his chair with a smug smile, his sharp eyes full of confidence. This was his favorite part of the show, when he made his guests uncomfortable, tore down their defenses, and forced them to reveal things they might not want to share. "All right, we're back," Alexander said, twirling a pen between his fingers. Then he turned back to Keanu, his gaze like a hunter watching its prey. "Before the break, I asked you a simple question, Keanu. What does that necklace mean to you?" The audience went quiet. Some leaned forward, waiting to see what Keanu would say. Keanu gently touched the silver cross again. His face was calm, impossible to read. "This necklace." He looked at it as if thinking about his words carefully. "It has personal meaning to me." Alexander raised an eyebrow, then laughed a little. "Personal?" he repeated in a teasing way. "Oh, come on, Keanu. You're a public figure. Everything you wear, everything you show sends a message." Keanu stayed still, but Alexander could feel the tension in the air. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his tone playful but sharp. "Let's be real," he said, pointing at the cross. "It's 2025. The world has changed. People have changed. And yet here you are wearing that." He smirked. "Yes," he continued, "that. Religion, faith, believing in things you can't see." He waved his hand as if brushing the idea away. "I'm not a religious man, Keanu. I believe in reason and progress. And honestly, I'm surprised that you, someone modern and intelligent, still hold on to something so old-fashioned." He chuckled as if Keanu was a child who still believed in fairy tales. "I understand when ordinary people who don't have much knowledge, believe in things like that. But you?" Alexander shook his head, his voice full of judgment. "I expected better." Some people in the audience laughed nervously. Others looked uncomfortable. Keanu, however, did not react. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He didn't seem embarrassed. He simply looked at Alexander with a quiet, steady gaze. Then he finally spoke. "Interesting, Alexander." His voice was calm but strong. "You talk as if faith and intelligence can't exist together." Alexander snorted. "Oh, come on, Keanu. Let's be honest. How many wars have been fought in the name of that cross? How many people have been hurt, killed, or judged because of it?" Keanu gently rubbed his thumb over the silver pendant. His eyes remained steady. "Do you want to debate history?" he asked. "Or do you want to debate my necklace?" The audience gasped. A soft ooh rippled through the crowd. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't used to being called out so directly. He let out a forced chuckle, but his fingers tightened on his chair's armrest. "Fair enough," he said, his voice a little sharper now. "Let's make it simpler. Are you wearing that cross as a statement? As a message to the world?" It was a trap. If Keanu said yes, Alexander would accuse him of trying to push a religious agenda. If he said no, he would look like a hypocrite for wearing something he didn't truly stand by. But once again, Keanu didn't fall for it. Instead, he tilted his head slightly as if studying Alexander. Then he calmly asked, "Are you wearing that expensive watch on your wrist as a statement, Alexander? As a message to the world?" Silence. Alexander didn't answer right away. The pause lasted just a second too long. The audience laughed. Keanu had taken control of the talk so easily that Hayes' jaw tightened for a quick second. The show host was used to strong arguments, but this was different. Keanu wasn't getting upset. He wasn't angry or fighting back. Instead, he was using Hayes' own way of speaking against him, and the crowd was starting to see it. But Hayes wasn't ready to lose. He leaned forward and made his voice lower, trying to sound serious. "All right, Keanu, let's be honest," he said. "We live in a world of science, technology, and evolution. Do you really think that symbol on your chest still matters?" This wasn't just a small question anymore, it was a challenge. The audience got quiet, waiting to hear Keanu's answer. He opened his mouth, ready to speak. But before he could say a word, the show's music started playing. It was time for a commercial break. Hayes smiled, feeling like he had won. He turned to the camera and said, "We'll be right back, folks. But trust me, this talk isn't over." The show's music played again. The lights in the studio changed a little as the show came back from the break. Hayes fixed his tie and held his hands together, still smiling like he had already won. He looked at the camera, making sure the audience was watching. "Before the break, we asked an important question," he said. "In a world full of science, technology, and evolution, does that symbol still matter?" He turned to Keanu, waiting for him to be unsure or nervous. But Keanu didn't look worried at all. Instead, he leaned forward a little, calm and steady. There was a small look in his eyes, one that was hard to read. "Alexander, can I ask you a question?" Keanu said. Hayes blinked, surprised that Keanu was now asking him something. "Oh, sure," Hayes said with a little laugh, trying to sound confident. Keanu looked at him for a moment, then asked, "What do you think evolution is?" Hayes narrowed his eyes, trying to see if there was a trick behind the question. "Oh, come on, Keanu," he said. "Evolution is about growing and moving forward. It's about leaving old ideas behind and building a better world with science and reason." Keanu nodded slowly, like he was thinking about the answer. "So, you think growing means throwing away anything that can't be tested in a lab?" he asked. Hayes laughed a little, but there was something nervous about it. "Well," he said, lifting his hands, "if you can't prove something, then it's just an idea, right?" Keanu kept looking at him, calm and steady. "What about love?" he asked. Hayes frowned. "What?" Keanu's voice was soft but strong. "Can you measure love, Alexander?" Some people in the crowd crossed their arms, thinking about the question. Others leaned in, interested. Hayes sighed. "I don't really get what you mean." Keanu didn't look away. "Does love exist?" Hayes rolled his eyes. "Of course it does." Keanu's voice stayed gentle. "But have you ever proved it with science? Have you ever held love in your hands or put it under a microscope?" The studio got very quiet. Hayes' face changed just a little, as if he realized where this was going. "Oh no," he said, waving his hand. "You're not going to compare religion to love." Keanu didn't blink. "I'm not comparing them. I'm asking you, if something can't be proven by science, does that mean it has no meaning?" The audience held their breath. Hayes blinked, not sure what to say. Keanu didn't raise his voice, didn't change his face. But his words were heavy. "Alexander, you talk about faith like it's a chain that traps people. But what if, for some, it's a bridge? What if, for me, this cross isn't about control, but about freedom? Hayes opened his mouth to say something, but Keanu spoke again before he could. You mentioned wars and people being hurt. Yes, people have twisted religion into something bad before. But that doesn't change the fact that, for millions, it has also been a safe place, a light in the dark. Keanu touched the silver cross on his chest. I don't wear this cross to say I'm better than anyone. I wear it as a reminder. Hayes's lips pressed together in a thin line. Keanu looked right at him. A reminder to be humble, to be kind. A reminder that the world is bigger than just me. The silence stretched. Then Keanu tilted his head slightly. What about you, Alexander? He asked. Hayes frowned. What about me? Keanu's voice was still soft, but his words hit hard. Do you believe in something bigger than yourself? The audience grew even quieter. The question hit like a punch. Hayes tensed up just a little, but the cameras caught it. He took a deep breath and sat up straight. We're not here to talk about me, he said quickly. Keanu gave a small smile, like he already knew what Hayes was thinking. Maybe we should be. Hayes's eyes darkened. Keanu leaned back in his chair. Because when someone gets so angry about a symbol, he said, it usually means there's something about it that bothers them deep inside. Hayes clenched his jaw. For the first time that night, he was on the defensive. And the audience noticed. The studio was completely silent as the debate continued. The audience was locked in, watching every move. Hayes knew he was losing control. And that made him mad. He took a deep breath, leaned back, and tried to hide his frustration. But his eyes showed a new sharpness. He had to win this argument. All right, Keanu, Hayes said, forcing a smile. But his voice had a bite to it now. You talk about kindness, about being humble. You say the cross is about freedom, not control. Then he leaned forward, eyes cold. But what about all the people who have suffered because of that symbol? What about the ones who were judged, hurt, and pushed away in its name? You wear that cross on your chest, but do you understand the weight it carries? The audience held their breath again. Keanu didn't move. He didn't look nervous. Instead, he gave a small, thoughtful smile. You talk like the cross itself is to blame, Keanu said softly. Hayes narrowed his eyes. Isn't it? Keanu let out a slow breath, running his fingers over the silver cross. If one person uses a hammer to build a house and another person uses the same hammer to break windows, is it the hammer's fault? He asked. The audience murmured, clearly impressed. Hayes's face darkened. That's a nice little story, Keanu, he said. But we're talking about real life. We're talking about history. Religion, Christianity, has been used for wars, for hurting people, for keeping people down. And yet, you wear that cross like it's just a decoration. Keanu's eyes stayed calm. And he was ready to answer. Keanu didn't react right away. He just tilted his head slightly, looking at Hayes carefully. His eyes were calm, thoughtful, like he was studying a puzzle. Then, in a steady voice, he asked, Alexander, do you believe in justice? Hayes frowned, confused by the question. Of course I do, he said. His tone was firm, certain, as if it was obvious. Keanu nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. And yet, he said softly, how many unfair things have been done in the name of justice? A small shift rippled through the audience. People leaned forward in their seats. The air in the studio seemed to change, as if something important was about to unfold. Hayes blinked, taken aback. He opened his mouth, then closed it. What are you getting at? He asked cautiously. Keanu's voice remained steady. People have done terrible things in the name of justice, he said. But that doesn't mean justice itself is bad. It just means people can twist even the purest ideals to serve their own purpose. Pause. The audience let those words sink in. Keanu continued, his tone measured and calm. The same goes for faith. Hayes's jaw tightened. His shoulders squared. He could feel the conversation shifting in a direction he hadn't expected, and he didn't like it. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his gaze locked onto Hayes's. If people have used faith to hurt others, that's not a failure of faith, he said. It's a failure of those people. You blame the cross, he added, but you ignore the hands that held it. A hush fell over the audience. The weight of Keanu's words settled over the room like a quiet storm. Hayes let out a short, forced laugh, trying to shake off the moment. So you're saying faith is innocent? He challenged. That religion bears no responsibility for the damage it has caused? Keanu shook his head. I'm saying faith is like fire, he answered. Fire can warm a home or it can burn it down. But fire itself isn't good or bad, it all depends on how people use it. Hayes clenched his jaw. He could feel the audience's attention slipping away from him, turning toward Keanu. He didn't like losing control. Not here. Not in front of millions of people. For the first time, he didn't have a sharp response. He didn't have a way to spin the conversation back in his favor. Keanu watched him carefully, then spoke again, softer this time. Maybe the real question isn't about what faith has done, he said. Maybe the real question is, why does it bother you so much? The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. The audience felt it. Alexander Hayes, the man who always had the upper hand, the man who built his career by dominating conversations, was now on the defensive. And he despised it. His fingers gripped the armrest of his chair just a little too tightly. He straightened his tie, trying to regain control. He forced a chuckle and leaned back, creating the illusion of confidence. "You're clever, Keanu. I'll give you that," he said, trying to sound amused. But his voice was just a little too even, a little too controlled. "You turned the question back on me. Nice move." He paused, then added, "But let's not pretend this is about me." Keanu didn't react. He didn't rush to respond. He simply looked at Hayes as if waiting for him to hear his own words. "Isn't it though?" Keanu finally said. Hayes scoffed, shaking his head. "I'm not the one sitting here wearing a religious symbol," he said. "I'm not the one promoting a belief system in front of millions of people." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Promoting?" Hayes gestured toward the small cross hanging around Keanu's neck. "Call it what you want," he said, "but when someone like you, an influential public figure, walks onto a stage wearing something like that, it sends a message. Whether you admit it or not, you're endorsing something." Keanu tilted his head slightly, considering Hayes' words. Then he asked, "So, if someone wears a rainbow flag, are they endorsing something?" The room tensed. It was a simple question, but its weight settled over the audience like a stone. Hayes hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Too short for most to notice. But Keanu noticed. Hayes recovered quickly. "That's different," he said. "A rainbow flag represents inclusivity. Equality." Keanu's expression didn't change. "And you don't think faith can?" The audience leaned in. Hayes' jaw tightened. "Faith has been used to exclude people, Keanu. To justify hate. You can't deny that." Keanu nodded. "And so have governments. So have ideologies. So has science. Nearly every belief system in history has been weaponized at some point. Yet we don't erase them. We refine them. We learn. We grow." He paused. "So why is faith the only thing you think should be erased?" The tension in the room deepened. The audience felt the shift. Hayes was losing ground and he knew it. He needed to regain control. "All right," he said sharply, leaning forward. "Let's skip the philosophy. Let's be real here. Do you really believe in this modern world, with all the knowledge we have, that people still need faith?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Yes." A simple, firm answer. Hayes narrowed his eyes. "Why?" Keanu took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. "Because logic alone doesn't fill the human soul." The audience stilled. Keanu continued, his voice calm but unwavering. "We live in an age of information. We can explain the stars. We can cure diseases. We can connect with anyone, anywhere, in an instant." He looked out at the audience. "But people are lonelier than ever. More anxious. More lost." A beat of silence. "The answers we find don't replace the meaning we seek." Hayes leaned back slightly. His face was unreadable. "So you're saying faith gives people meaning?" Keanu nodded. "For some, yes. For me, yes. And I think that's something worth respecting, even if it's not for you." Hayes exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Respecting," he repeated. "That's an interesting word. Because some would argue that religion has done more harm than good." Keanu didn't argue. He acknowledged it. Some would. Hayes' eyes lit up. He saw an opportunity. "And what do you say to them?" Keanu's gaze didn't waver. His response was quiet but firm. "I'd say pain isn't exclusive to faith," he said. "Humans are flawed, Alexander. We make mistakes. We correct them. But if we only focus on what was done wrong, we ignore what was done right." His voice remained steady. "The love, the hope, the kindness that has also come from faith, from people who live by its true meaning, not by its distortion." Silence. Hayes pressed his lips into a thin line. The moment stretched. The audience knew it. Alexander Hayes had lost. For the first time in a long time, he had no comeback. The silence in the studio wasn't the usual kind. It was a thick, heavy silence. A silence of realization. Then, one person clapped. Then another. And then, the entire audience rose to their feet, erupting into applause. Alexander Hayes sat frozen. He looked at the cameras. He could already see the headlines forming. He had lost, and he knew it. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves simply stood, nodded to the crew, shook a few hands, and left. No victory speech. No celebration. Just quiet dignity. Reporters swarmed him outside. "Keanu, how do you feel about the interview? Do you think Hayes was unfair?" Keanu didn't answer. He just smiled softly, got into a car, and disappeared into the night. His silence spoke louder than words. Days later, Keanu finally broke his silence. A single post on social media. No long statements. No explanations. Just one message. We don't have to agree to respect each other. We don't have to believe the same things to walk the same path. And that was why Keanu had won. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories filled with adventure, mystery, and excitement. Your support means the world, and it helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.